So I'm going to go ahead and get started because we've had a lot of people question, they're finally waking up to the fact that Olentangy doesn't get any money from the state. And so we've had a lot of people say, well, why don't you ask them for more money? Why don't you ask? Well, the governor's in New Hampshire today, so I'm not going to ask him. He's been there. I mean, he's been out of state for how long? The state budget is done it's a biennial budget, so it's done for 2 years. So we won't have a chance to ask for more money until next year at this time. That's when they'll be debating any additional funding for us. Now, Representative Brenner, hi, come on in. Representative Brenner did propose a bill, House Bill 346, that would start us on the way to fair funding so that we would start getting money more in line with what the private schools get, and that's $1,181.66. But House Bill 346 has yet to have a hearing, and I'm going to be quite honest with you. I work for the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. We're lobbyists. We're a big business lobbying organization. We can't even get our bills passed in the House and Senate right now because this is an election year, and they are concentrating on getting reelected. All of the seats in the House are up, and half of the seats in the Senate. And so if it's not about abortion or guns, they are not discussing it. And I'm just being honest with you. So I wrote Representative Brenner and Senator Jordan an email, and I included it so that you can see it, because we want to keep our message in front of them. They have yet to respond, although last Friday, was it last Friday, Representative Brenner, he did jump on my Facebook page. I have a special page for just Olentangy School Board information. And he started commenting on my Facebook page. And so then people started commenting, Holly commented, a couple other people commented to ask him what the status of his bill was. You know, my big question is, no one has ever been able to tell me why private schools receive any funding from the state. And so that's the question that I had, and I asked him, and then I wanted to know what the status of House Bill 346 was. But I have yet to get an answer from him. So
tell him where he was.
Yeah, Friday he was visiting a charter school in the Cincinnati area. So last year, actually at this time, last year toward the end of the school year, he contacted this committee and wanted to tour a school. But he contacted us in May, and all of our schools were preparing for the end of the year. And, you know, he wanted to tour a school and meet with teachers, and we'll do that at any time. But when he contacted us, it was toward the end of the year, and he was finishing up with the budget process, and so he wanted to come in after the budget process and talk to us. Well, we would already be out of school by then. So I will tell you, he does come to our business advisory council meetings, so he does come to those. And at least he was commenting on my Facebook page, so he's reading my comments and everything, but he has yet to tell me why private schools get any funding at all. And I don't know why his bill has not had a hearing in the House Finance Committee. I think they're just sitting on all bills right now until after the election. Yes, Dad?
He's chairperson of the Education Committee.
He is.
So it's a shame we don't have more leverage on that.
Yes. One thing he did, and he did jump on, and you'll catch him sometimes in Twitter conversations. There is another bill that it is probably going to pass because it's an emergency bill that would exempt school districts from being penalized because students opted out of state testing, which is a good thing because all of the students that opted out of state testing were given zeros, meaning they missed every question on the test when that really isn't the case. They just didn't take the test. And so those zeros are penalizing school districts across the state. We pulled our GPAs. I had our curriculum director, Jack Fetty, pull our GPAs because Representative Brenner was insinuating that students who opted out were poor performing students. So I had him pull all the GPAs. Now, we didn't ask for names of students by any means, but they could pull all the GPAs from middle school and high school, and in every single school, they performed at least as well or better than the students who took the test. Their GPAs were as high or higher. One school, they were a lot higher than the kids who took the test. So he was insinuating that teachers or administrators were telling people parents to opt their kids out who do not perform well on the state tests. And that is not the truth in Olentangy, and we have the data to back it up. So there was in the bill, there was a line in this bill that would really, it was what is it, a felony or misdemeanor? It was a misdemeanor.
And loss of teaching license
And
agreement.
if you
about
told
it.
someone not to take the test. Now, to me, that's a trust issue. We're not going to tell any student not to take the test, never. We're not going to do that. But for them to think that any teacher in the state of Ohio would, but that was a trust issue. But he has promised he's taking that out. And so the amended bill does not have that penalty in the bill. So I hope that the bill does pass, because I don't believe that school districts should be penalized for parents enacting their right to opt their students out of the state tests. So that's where we are legislatively. But I just wanted to let people know there's nothing going to be done on a funding front this year. I don't want you to feel defeated, because we will continue to advocate, and any additional funding that we do get in the state budget will go to make our operating levy last longer. So that's what we will do. So does anyone have any questions on that? Okay.
I have one more thing. The people that I've talked to don't understand the idea that we can't build a building and not put stuff in it. They're not getting that
Oh, yeah.
message. That's the one thread of
Yes.
the people I visited.
Well,
I don't know how we
yes.
make that more apparent. I thought we did a good job, but
Yeah.
that's the one thing I'm running into.
Yeah, because and we've had this happen before in Westerville and in Dublin, where the bond portion of any issue goes to build the building, the bricks and mortar. And Ralph knows this all too well, because he's chaired the facilities committee. And so that builds the building. What the bond does not do, it doesn't turn on the lights.
Right.
It doesn't
Books
put,
and desks.
yeah,
That's
desks,
what I
it
kept
doesn't
trying to
put
explain.
teachers. So you need the operating funds to operate the building. So both in Dublin and in Westerville, they passed bond issues and failed their operating. And so they had buildings that sat. And so, and we don't want that to happen here. I know Westerville had damage to their building, so we don't want that to happen. We've always bundled ours together. When we've needed operating and bond, you put it together, and it's one vote, because you do need both to open up a school. So that's the answer to that question. So, all right.
Any more questions? No? We'll move on with Adam Fleischer. He is a Berlin Township trustee, and he's going to talk about the township and school district partnership we have.
And I just want to say, Adam is one of us. Adam graduated from Olentangy. And so he met with the superintendent and I over Christmas break. And I didn't realize all of the stuff that has to be done at the township level too before we can even open a school. So he's going to talk to us about what's happening in Berlin.
Sure. And, I called Julie yesterday and said, I really don't know what I'm going to say, because the township involvement with the new school is going to be somewhat limited relative to other developments that we're used to, because the school district is exempt from the zoning process. So if you were typically, like if you were a developer, you would prepare an application, and it would have to go to regional planning, and then it would have to go to our zoning commission, and then ultimately the board of trustees. But you guys don't have to worry about that, and be thankful, because everyone in this room that is familiar with zoning can attest to the fact that it can be a bit of a headache. But yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how the township intends to accommodate the new high school and the logistics of preparing for that. The zoning, you're clear, give a hoorah and say we're done with that. But that being said, it behooves, I think, both entities to sort of work in concert in regards to this project. And we have been, as Julie said. There have been numerous discussions, not only just with me and Julie and Mark, but also with our fire chief, with the county engineer, with the county in general. So it's been very collaborative at this point. And it has to be because, like I said, we both have a stake interest in the result. For example, if there was a fire in the new high school, it'd very likely be Berlin Township's fire department that responds to that. And then also the road and traffic impact of the new high school will be significant as far as our township is involved. because we maintain the roads and the arteries that will lead or eventually lead to the new high school. So I guess on that front, the two roads, potentially three, that are important in Berlin Township in relation to the new high school are probably Berlin Station Road, which will be the bus service entrance to the north, and a service road or potentially two service roads that will be built by the county and probably maintained by the township that will be additional entrances into the high school. So Berlin Station, that's where, like I said, the bus entrance will be. Berlin Station is a county road, so we won't maintain that, but the service station, or the service roads, we will. Yeah, I mean, I wish I could kind of talk further in more detail about it, but I just kind of want to stress that this has been a collaborative effort so far. Numerous meetings have taken place between township officials, representatives of Olentangy, the fire department, the county engineer, etc. So, I mean, it's pretty smooth sailing at this point. I think it really serves as testament to how effective local government can be when we all meet together and put our minds to it. So now what's left is just to secure the funds to begin construction.
Do you want to talk about the railroad crossing?
Well, so the railroad crossings that are important are on Berlin Station, which is a county road. So we won't, that's not necessarily our jurisdiction, but there are already lights there. So we're safe in that regard, but there's additional security measures that can be taken. But there is one railway on another road that will probably be a primary artery into the new high school that is on one of our roads. And we are applying to a couple different, the Federal Railway Commission and a couple different state funds that supply grants.
And this property is just north of here on Berlin Station Road. So it's accessible from South Old State, and what's the road to the west? What would be the road?
Gregory?
Gregory Road. And Gregory goes all the way up to 36, 37.
That's right.
So you can access, you could come across 36, 37 and go south on Gregory and then turn onto Berlin Station as
Right.
well and get there. It's, how many, 80 acres? 80, yeah. And it was purchased in 2003 from a family, the Cozy family. Bonnie Cozy was a longtime teacher here in the school district and didn't want to sell it to developers. And we bought it and been sitting on it. We actually had that property before we had Orange. And so we knew from our projections that I was going to talk about at some point that we were going to need another high school. So we bought that land. When we work with, townships, whether it's Berlin or Orange or Liberty, it's nice for them to let us know what's happening. And we have a better understanding now. We've been going through a whole bunch of meetings. We just met with Liberty Township, Orange Township, we've met with Berlin Township, so that we're all on the same page. But what I don't want people to think is that that we're going to build a wall around Olentangy, because we can't. We're made up of 7 townships and 4 cities. And unless you remember the Kingman Theater, the Halfway House, the filling station, Senior, how was it? It was Saturday Sports Club, and before that it was Senior something, the pizza place in Powell, and then it became Saturday Sports Club. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then you're part of the growth. Because all of those things used to be here, right? We had the pizza place that was in Powell. They used to drive around in cars with sirens on the top. And then Don Antonio's Pizza. And then it turned into Saturday Sports Club, and now it's Local Roots. The Halfway House was on 23. It was a truck stop and a diner, and now that's where the Log Cabin Pizzeria is. The Kingman Theater was at Cheshire, and that was an outdoor movie theater, and that was there. And then the filling station then became Nacho Mama's, and now it's Lilman's. So those are the old stomping grounds, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you moved in after those things had all changed, and so we're all part of growth. And so we cannot build a wall around Olentangy, but we can have growth plans that are reasonable.
That's right.
And Orange Township last night approved the Evans property, which it's at the end of this road, at the end of Shanahan, that's open field right now, and that's all the Evans property. And it's going to be a mixture of commercial development and residential development. And part of it falls into Berlin. But have you guys gotten anything
We've
yet?
not received an application, but I've been significantly involved in the discussions through the past year, so I'd be happy to answer questions at that front. But we haven't received an application, so. Yeah.
So they haven't gone through the zoning process
Nope.
yet. Orange
Nope.
Township, they approved their zoning, the pieces that are in Orange Township last night. And I want to say 900 homes?
At least, I think they
I
said
think it's
over
900 homes.
1,000.
It's in
That's
the,
what it is.
it's in this week newspaper
Mhm.
right now. But it's a mixture of condominiums, single-family homes. It's a walkable village is what they're promoting it as.
Some businesses.
Businesses, possibly a YMCA, and they've said possibly a school, land for a school. We've had a lot of land donated in the past. Hyatt's, all the property around Hyatt's, that was donated. Oak Creek, Glen Oak, Tyler Run, Johnny Cake, I know I'm forgetting. Cheshire Elementary. So we have had a lot of developers donate land to the school district to build the buildings. I get a lot of questions, well, why don't they donate the building? They're not going to donate a building to us. But I just want people to know that when you have good plans in place, then you can kind of control the growth. And what we are hoping that when it goes through Berlin Township, that it stays in Berlin Township.
That's what we hope to.
Because if it gets annexed into Delaware City, then you have higher zoning. And you've been answering a lot of questions on
You
that.
can come to me, I'm on the City of Delaware's Planning and Development Commission,
Mhm.
and schools are not exempt in the City of Delaware for zoning, by the way. We're getting all of City of Delaware is changing their buildings and expanding and stuff like that, so they would.
So
if
they
it's
all
annexed
have to
prior
go through zoning?
It would come through, yes.
Wow. And so he's been
And it's a
commenting, a long process. He's been commenting a lot because I've had a lot of people ask in the Glen Ross area,
Mhm.
that's Delaware City, a lot
It
of
is.
it. And so you have an added income tax there? Is it an added income tax?
We do, we have, City of Delaware has its income tax, and also that area has a special tax, they call them community authorities.
Yes.
Similar to like a TIF, if you know what a TIF is, type of thing that's on the residential side. And that's the extra tax that probably people might be mentioning, which is really just basically to build the
Buildings,
Glen
the
Parkways
infrastructure.
and stuff like that. It's building the actual roads type of thing,
Mhm.
so.
Because school districts, like, it's another question you get, school districts cannot assess builders, like, they can't make them pay the school district money for selling a home, they're called assessment fees. We can't, we are not allowed to do that, and I don't think townships are allowed to do that either.
No.
But if you form a community authority, you can have fees that go to the infrastructure.
Yes, and it's similar to a millage type of
Yes.
thing. That's, it's based on property value, and it's collected by the county and by the auditor and stuff like that, so yes, that's.
Glen Ross has a community authority, or not Glen Ross,
Golf
Golf
Village.
We have
Villages.
the infrastructure
Yes.
tax,
Mhm.
yeah, it's like $1,000 a house, I think, for 30 years.
Yeah, it's 1,000.
Can they not do that with the Evans Farm area?
They have not formed a community development there.
Well, they want to remain in the township.
Right, yeah. And, well, that's another thing you have to consider is, do you have the infrastructure for fire, for Berlin Township?
That's the big question, yeah.
Mm.
And sewage is the bigger question at this point, but yeah.
So those are some of the things that we deal with when development is coming in. So I just want people to know that we cannot build a wall around Olentangy. If you've moved here in the last 20 years, you're part of the growth problem too. I am too. And so, but we work with our townships. It's very hard to work with the cities, Westerville and Columbus. Powell's a little easier, Westerville and Columbus, because we're such a little piece of their pie. It's very difficult for us to be heard there. Now, in Westerville, the area that's impacting us now is south of Polaris Parkway. There's a new strip mall. It's right when Worthington, Galena dead ends into Polaris Parkway. There's a Mucci and Company dog store. There's a new organic grocery store there. BW3s is going to build a new restaurant there. Everything behind there, that's all apartments, that's all Olentangy. So everything, there's apartments south of Polaris, that's Olentangy. And that's Westerville. And so people didn't realize that when it
Sign that says, welcome to
Welcome,
Westerville.
yeah. Oh, yeah, it does. It says, welcome to Westerville.
I just want to put a sign underneath that. It says,
Say, Olentangy Schools.
Yeah.
I have a quick question, and maybe
Yes.
there's not a short answer for this, but as far as the annexation from Berlin to Delaware, what gives? I mean, what would be the reason that they would?
Municipality can almost always annex a territory because they have to be able to prove that they can provide better for the area than the neighboring entity. So because it's larger, they can provide sewage, they can provide fire department, other utilities like that. And if we didn't have the sewer capacity, then we couldn't, prove that we could provide for the area.
Even with the new fire department?
Oh, fire we might be fine.
Yeah.
But like I said, sewage is the big question right now.
So if land gets annexed somewhere else and they don't have the density that the current land has, then we could be looking at more homes per acre. So, and in Delaware, I believe they do allow more homes per acre than Berlin Township.
Oh, certainly. But I mean, you guys can collect income tax, so it behooves, the city.
And pass the sewage fees along to developers at the same time.
Yes.
So that's really kind of
The big thing.
a big thing.
We're kind of relying on county help at this
Yeah.
point to make it work.
Didn't Orange just recently pass their sewage capacity, so we can build a higher density?
I am not sure.
I'm pretty sure that's why all the apartments start popping up on 23. Because they had that, yeah, I'm pretty sure that happened.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think that's what Rob told me.
What, Rob Quigley?
Yeah.
From Orange Township?
Mhm.
Yeah, see, we're always talking to our township people. So I'm supposed to talk to Powell City next week. So does anyone have any questions of what's happening in Berlin Township? Do you know anything else that's happening that you can tell us?
Well, we're continuing to experience exponential growth, but besides that, not a whole lot. Evan's property is the elephant in the room right now, and we'd like it to remain in the township.
How many square miles is Berlin? Do you know?
Off the top of my
Because we
head.
have 95, I'm just trying to, in my head, we have 95 square miles for Olentangy.
Mhm.
Is any of your township in Buckeye Valley or?
No, we're
all Olentangy?
yeah.
Because so is Orange. Orange is all, and so is Liberty. But Concord splits, Genoa splits, and I think Delaware Township splits with Delaware schools.
Right. I'm trying to think. We have a couple of different, strips of land, but I think it's all one.
Mhm. Okay, any other questions for?
I just had a couple of
Yeah.
things to add with what Mr. Fleischer said. We have met with, Mr. Bullard met with us last week with the county,
Mhm.
and we met with Steve Arnold and Chet Hyde, the zoning on it. So we've had several meetings with the township, and they've been great to work with, and along with the county as well. So in our planning, you mentioned Berlin Station Road, we will be asking the board at some point in the future to give an easement or a right-of-way there for turning lanes and road expansion in front of the new high school, as well as we're allowing for future Pyatt Road extension to come through on school property working with the
Oh.
county. So we have space to do that, and it benefits us because our main drives, we want to come in off there, and when the Pyatt Road is extended, whenever we think it wouldn't be, most of our bus traffic probably will come from that way because of the crossing,
yeah.
the ability to cross 23 and coming across Cheshire. So
Mhm.
we have been working closely with the county on aligning these things with,
That's right.
Mr. Fleischer mentioned about the roads and all those things. So they have been very good to work with, and Fire's already given us some things they'd like us to do to accommodate and help out there, which aren't unexpected or unusual, and so we'll continue with that. But we are working closely to deal with the roads, and Berlin Station is a narrow road, much like
Yeah.
3Bs and K and some of the others. So we'll work together to try to make that happen.
And I wasn't going to bring up the Pyatt Road extension because nothing substantive has really been decided as of yet, but it's part of the 2001 county thoroughfare plan, and it eventually will go up north and connect to Berlin Station. At least that's the vision.
And when I mentioned the Pyatt Road extension, there, but on our end of it, coming off of Berlin Station to get to the school property,
Mhm.
that's the extension I'm speaking.
Yeah, because we're not going to build the Pyatt Road extension.
Correct. We'd like you to.
Pyatt is the road where Shanahan dead ends here. Pyatt is the one that goes north and south, so that's the one that they're hoping can go further north.
Right. Well, it
And
would
it would
reach Berlin
benefit-
Station and then
Yes.
go, you know, all
And
the
it would
way up.
benefit the entire county if
Right.
it would happen, because then
Right.
you'd have another north and south thoroughfare
And
to take.
if I had to speculate, I think it'd be at least a 2 or 3 lane road. It'd be significant.
Mhm.
Because Pyatt Road right now is very narrow.
Yes.
So we will allow for that to come through school property if it gets expanded, but for us coming off of Berlin Station, that would be beneficial to the school.
Yeah.
And the county will be constructing those.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything, even though Berlin Station's county, as far as the railroad tracks, those are very busy railroad tracks,
Right.
of making overpasses on both of them? I know the long-term thoroughfare plans for Cheshire is an overpass, and that's a double set where they merge together.
Right.
That's where the railroad tracks come together at, but just at Berlin Station, they're still split by, you know, whatever, a couple hundred yards.
I agree. I mean, if it
Have you
were
heard anything?
if it weren't a county road, I'd be all over it and
Yeah.
applying, but it's just not in our jurisdiction. I'd like that too. There's something called, not aqueducts, but some sort of security upgrade to railway crossings that you can do that's short of, you know, what you're talking about.
And we'd also had heard at one point there would be, with this Evans property, a bridge over the railroad tracks on Lewis Center. But I think because of the pitch, they'd have to start so far back on Lewis Center Road to get up over, you know how when they did the one over at Home Road, that they're not sure that that could be done.
Mm.
But at one point there, when they were going to turn, when there was the cobblestone development that was a couple years ago, they were going to turn downtown Lewis Center into the center and do a bridge over the railroad tracks there. But the pitch is, you have to be really high, and you'd have to take a lot of land in order to get the bridge up high enough to go over. So I know that's the issue with Lewis Center Road. Yeah.
Evans was wanting to build one out here at Shanahan and dig these railroad tracks right out here. That was, I heard the proposal this fall and they
Oh,
were
when they
talking
came
a
to
lot.
talk to the neighborhoods?
Yeah, they were telling us they wanted one out here, because we live in
Yeah.
Hyatt Meadows here.
Did they say anything, Jeff, do you know of any bridges?
I have not.
Yeah, because I haven't heard either, and I saw the schematic design, but I didn't pay attention to,
Yeah, I
if it
don't
was a bridge
remember
over the
having a
railroad
bridge
track.
either.
I think there was. I think that they talk about Congressman T. Berry helping out with that.
on Shanahan.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it was a
At least
federal-
you'd
they're
get,
trying
at
to
least
get it
there'd be
federal.
one, you know, whether it's Lewis Center or Shanahan,
Right.
at least there'd be one bridge over.
I think they're trying to get federal involved, like,
Mhm. Yeah.
Might be a long time to read.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just move on. You want to just keep on?
You want to keep
On
on
going
going
with
where
that?
you're
We'll let
going?
Ralph, we'll let Ralph start actually.
Okay.
Ralph's going to talk about our planning we do for enrollment growth
Yes.
and how we look at developments and do that. Because I know a lot of times people come to us and they want to know, hey, what's going on with that development and why can't you stop it, which you do with it. And we don't track every development because in our planning, our modeling takes the zoning, like you talked about density, and our consultants will plan for a house where there's every possible lot. So if a housing development comes in with 150 homes, that doesn't necessarily impact us, because we've already planned for there to be houses there. It's when the density changes, the change from township to city, and density changes, that's when we have to worry, because that messes with our modeling because of the number of houses they can get in an existing development that we planned for. But Ralph's going to talk about how we do that and go forward.
Right, so this is going to get a bit geeky, but just bear with me. Julie's heard this lots and lots of times. So this is kind of a mashup of the annual 10-year planning that we do, as well as the build-out plan. And we've done, since I've been involved, 3 different build-out plans. And the first one is the one that Julie mentioned, which led us to get the land for high school 4. So that was long time ago.
When we thought we would have 5 high schools.
No, mistake,
6?
4.3, I think.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't quite 5. So we've actually got 2 different models. This is the one that we call the smoothing model, and it's the one that we present to the board every November. And this is what we use to project the schools are going to need to handle the enrollment for the next 10 years. Okay, so it's based on average pass enrollment growth. It's good for relatively short planning horizons. They'll understand here for a while. It's based on the following assumptions. Births, so we look at the births 5 years before to model how many kids we're going to have going into kindergarten. Okay, so it's kind of predictive, but obviously we know that over 5 years people move out and people move in, so we do something called a survival rate. We look at building permits, both single and multifamily. We look at grade-to-grade survival rates. So if we look at how many children were in first grade last year are going to be in the second grade this year, and that's what we call the survival rate. So that's based upon, again, families moving in, families moving out, new housing coming online that are going to bring new children into the school district. So all of these, and then the housing yield, how many children per house is going to come into the district. So all these go into creating a model that we use for projecting next year, the next few years after. So, yeah, Jeff? So, the first thing we look at is how did we do last year? So, this is the one we presented to the board in November. And if you look here, we were really close. We missed it by 4 students. And so we're all sitting around patting ourselves on the back saying, wow, we really nailed it. Then we started looking more closely and we said, oh, there's some challenges here. If you look here, we were under forecast 73 students in the PK, and that becomes really important for elementary building needs because each of those kids take up lots and lots of room. So it really mucks up our building models. Okay. Then the other thing we've got is we were down 41 on kindergarten and we were down 20 on first graders. And that's significant. It's much more significant to be under forecast or that more enrollment than we forecast in lower grades because guess what? It's like the pig through the python. They're going to be in our school district for a long time. You need to look at the survival rate that keeps on growing and growing and growing. Okay? So we look at the bottom line number, but we also look at the grades. By the way, if you have any questions, yell, shout, scream, do something. Okay. So again, this is where we get the survival rate. So what we'll do is we'll look at the first grade going to the second grade to the third grade. So you can see what happens is we started out at 1237, and if you followed that class down here, it keeps getting bigger every year. So 1460. So that's we have intrinsic growth in our grades in our classes as they go through the school year. And this happens not because of births, because they're obviously already born, but it has to do with new housing development, families moving out, families moving in. Okay? Next. Okay, these are our births. And if you go out here, you'll see that our births have been reasonably steady over the last 6 or 7 years. And why is that important? Because the number of births is going to affect how many kindergartens we're going to have in a little while. And so it says as long as that remains steady, then our standard smoothing model, our standard survival ratio is going to work. If all of a sudden we saw births spiking up like that, we say, oh, we have to really look at our model because there's been something has changed. We have more births, therefore we have more kindergartens 5 years down the road. Okay. Building permits. Look where we were in 2004. Look where we were last year. So in general, our building permits have been reasonably steady over the last several years. Now, and Jeff, can you talk about that? Because if you drive around, you're going to see lots of subdivisions being platted. Can you speak to why we're not seeing the building permits that we expect based upon subdivisions? Okay.
What we saw in 2004 are a lot of spec homes. And that's what really jumped that number up. So the builders were building without buyers. And it was a good economy. You know, why not? Because they knew at some point the buyers would come, and they did. So that's why we saw a really big spike there. Then the recession hit, and the builders started running out of money. They did not want to gamble with spec homes. They were not going to break ground until they had cash in hand. And so now what we're seeing, even though you see a lot of roads going in, and if you drive up Cheshire, you see all the roads going in around Glen Ross, or even where Shamrock Golf Course was, you see the roads going in. They're not building spec homes. They're waiting until they have cash in hand. Now, I've heard at Shamrock, they're getting cash in hand. So
Well,
that's-
I used to work with P&D Builders, and I was their finance manager. One of the problems is you can't get funding for spec homes or to buy property.
Mhm.
And you either have to fund it all yourself, because they're literally recalling the loans. So builders kind of have their hands tied.
Yes.
Yeah, so because this is a huge component of forecasting enrollment, we can look, we get every year reports from the Ohio Regional Planning, and we can see how many lots are platted and how many units are going to be in each one of those. And we say, oh my goodness, that's a real concern, but then we look here and say, oh, the building permits has not really exploded. It leaves, when we talk to the board, we said, we're always a bit uncomfortable because what people see and what the numbers support are, they're a bit different. So we're saying we have to still go on numbers until we see that the yields, the grade-to-grade survival rates start to really diverge significantly from a model. Then we say, oh, something else is going on. So we think as long as the survival ratios, the burst, and the building permits stay reasonably confident that our model is okay. If any one of those start to really vary wildly, then we're going to have to take a real strong look at what our model says. So if that's not bad enough, we've got another model. There's a housing model, and this one came out of the build-out plan, the third one we did, and there was one done in 2014 we worked with Scott Leopold from D. Young Richter. And so the board asked us, well, before we go to high school, are you all going to need this high school for 2 years? Or are you going to need it for a long period of time? Because if we only need a high school for a couple of years, then, you know, we get modulars to do something else. You don't need these buildings that are going to be around for 100 years. So I said, well, let's take a look at that. And when we started looking at the data, we said, well, there's a couple interesting things going on here. We found that the age of the subdivision will affect the yield of the students coming from the houses in that subdivision. We also found that there's a correlation to the subdivision price. In other words, a higher price subdivision may have more or less than a lower price subdivision. Here's the housing yields. This one, as we talked about, what happens if the land gets annexed to the city of Delaware from Berlin Township, is that the expected build-out rates and the undeveloped land and zoning plans. We based our model based upon the zoning laws or zoning rules based upon where that the current zoning rules. So if your land goes to him, then all of a sudden this undeveloped land and zoning plans gets shot out of the water because we're going to get more houses and therefore more students coming out of that. So it will affect the build-out.
So our projections can only project what we know today, what
Right.
we know when we do the projections.
Is that using like a comprehensive land usage plan? Or,
Yeah.
I mean, I can speak for Berlin Township. That was designed a decade ago and was very conservative, so I don't know how accurate it is. Oh, I know that's only for information you have.
Yeah, I said we go with the zoning density
Right.
for the undeveloped land and use that.
Right.
So if you've got an updated plan, then we certainly, that would be good to have,
Mhm.
good to know. Okay. Next. This is, I love this chart. What this says, we said, we're trying to look at where our students are coming from, right? And we said, let's look at subdivisions and let's look at the age of the subdivisions correlated with the housing price, okay? So what you see here, and this is the yield, and what you see is that, for example, less than 5 years is 0.45, and over time it goes to 1.02 children, students per house, and then it starts going down again. Now it varies a little bit, but the pattern is consistent. Everything we looked at, you start out small, the subdivision starts maturing, it builds out, you get more students, people age, children leave their houses, move off someplace, and the yield starts to drop. So if you think about this, if we had nobody ever left a subdivision, pretty soon we would have 0 children from our existing subdivision. So we know that's not true. So there is this turnover pattern of houses in a subdivision that affect these yields, okay? And the model tries to accommodate that. And any questions? I said it's kind of geeky, so.
And the yield, like if you see a yield of 0.7, that means each house will have 0.7 children. Because you know that some houses will have kids, some won't. So if you figure in that subdivision, every home will have 0.7 kids, you can kind of ballpark it.
Okay, so I said we have 2 models. Well, we actually have like 4 models. So one of the impacts on the build out is on the yield is how fast will this subdivision's undeveloped land build out. And so we said, well, how many building permits generally are we having these days? Okay, we think if you remember the chart I showed a couple of minutes ago, I'll ask somebody who wants to ask the question. Anyway, we think it's about 500. So we said, well, let's assume it's 500, but let's say things go gangbusters, and let's say it goes to 750, which is still way under the 1,700 we had in 2004. Or let's say it really drops off a cliff and it's about 300. What happens then is that the curves all look the same, but some of them keep much higher and drop lower, and some of them have a real slow curve and then drop down. But remember, why does it drop down? Because as the subdivision ages, people age too, and the yield drops. So I keep going down like this, like this, like this. But the interesting thing here is the number of years that we are going to have need for high school for.
It's the dotted line.
It's the dotted line. So this, if you look at this dotted line, all the years where these different curves are above that dotted line are where we need high school for. Okay? So even this one, 300, the most conservative, still says for about 2050 to 2070 or so, we will have the need for the high school. Again, we think this is not a very likely scenario given the developments happening in the district.
And we don't think that 300 is a likely scenario because if you look at 2015 and 2014, we're trending more along the green line, which is the 500. So we felt comfortable accepting the 500 model.
We did, and the board accepted the 500 model. And then these two are the 10-year projections. The red one is the 2014 projection, 2015 projection. And we did that just because it would be really embarrassing to go to the board and have our 2 different models saying wildly different things. So because they are in general tracking along the same lines, we feel confident in both the veracity of the housing model and the smoothing model.
So by using this model, between here and here is how long we can sustain for high schools. And this is 2057, 2058. And so they said, well, Okay, what happens after that?
Okay, so what happens after that? And the development committee, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
facilities committee, we started out and looked at
Oh, gosh,
20 options of what do we do to handle this. And we've met a long time, and we just started throwing options out that just didn't work. One of the options was do nothing, and we looked and said, it just doesn't work. And we came down to 3 options. One was build an academy, and although we presented that to the board, the committee said, we don't think that works. The problem is that if you're building an academy, you are effectively building high school 4 without the amenities you need for high school 4. And the transportation and the scheduling just became absolute nightmares. The other option was to expand each of the existing high schools. And to Julie's point, the question becomes what happens after that? If the enrollment does start dropping, now you've got these high schools that can handle, say, 2,400 students, and it starts dropping off. Now, what do you do? And you only need 1,800 capacity. You've got 600 students over capacity. So that became a, what do you do with excess capacity at the end if the enrollment starts dropping? So then we said, well, what about high school number 4? And we said, well, it's the easiest one to rewind the string, because what happens here is Olentangy High School is 50 years old right here. Believe it or not, it's been around a while. Even more importantly, Shanahan Middle School will be 100 years old right there. So what's happening here is that our cost of maintaining these old schools is going to go up. So the thought process is that it starts dropping. What do? We take a wrecking ball to Shanahan Middle School, turn Olentangy High School into the middle school, and we're back to 3 high schools.
And don't you predict Liberty enrollment going down in the next
Liberty,
few years?
right now, hits a peak in 2 years. It starts kind of
Okay.
heading down again.
Heading down with the limit.
With the
Right.
limit, yeah.
We're more built up over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, then it starts naturally, as Ralph mentioned, the developments, they start rolling over, they naturally age and then change out. So it becomes more steady at Liberty while the east side continues to grow and expand.
And a good neighborhood to point out is Green Meadows, High Meadows.
Oh, yeah.
Because that used to be our explosive neighborhood when we first started doing this.
Well, Green Meadows, High Meadows, we always look at those because it's the part of the problem we've got with the model is many of our subdivisions aren't very old. So you remember the one chart says we look at how they've aged. The aging, the yield as subdivision age is living on a fairly small number of subdivisions because most of our subdivisions are so new. So Green Meadows, High Meadows is 35 years old. And what we've seen is that its enrollment yield has stabilized and it stays constant over many housing turnover within those
Yeah.
subdivisions.
The price point is
The
right.
price point is right.
For people to get in, so
Yeah.
as soon as somebody graduates, except for Ed Twilliger, he has stayed there forever. Ed Twilliger is still there. The price point is great, so when the kids graduate, the people leave and a new family comes in. Or it's also a neighborhood where you start out and then you move up to a more expensive neighborhood. And so you're staying within the school district and then another family comes in. So that neighborhood is a real recyclable neighborhood.
It's kind of a benchmark for us.
Mhm.
And the aging part, because there was such a stoppage just a few years ago, some of the communities look older than what they really are, because now they're just picking back up again
Right.
in the building cycle. So you could look at it and say, my neighborhood, Glen Ross, is actually an
Right.
11-year-old neighborhood. You drive in there, you're like, that's probably more aged than a 5-6-year neighborhood.
That's interesting. I
You
thought-
have
I
to
thought
be
about
very
it.
careful with your
Yeah, I hadn't
yields,
thought about that.
because your
you're
yields are
right.
gonna be off. And we did this at the redistricting committee, or tried to bring these kind of things up, and it's such a large, you're trying to do everything over an entire
Yeah.
district.
Mhm.
But when you drill down to the subdivisions, you do have to be careful as far as when they stopped and when they started back up
Yeah, because
again.
you've got this
Because your
with
yields will go
2008.
I know in the city of Delaware,
Yeah.
we see higher yields than like that .7 for that price range type of thing. Tends to be a bit higher than that, actually. So that might be why your kindergarten, first grades might be missing off. If you can see which kindergartners or which first grade buildings we were off at.
We also have a difficult time at the kindergarten level because we have a lot of kids, my kids included, who went to all-day kindergarten elsewhere. And then they come into the system for first grade.
Right.
So you'll see a big jump.
Right, and again, to Julie's point, do you remember that slide 15 minutes ago? We model kindergartens based upon the first 5 years before. We model first grade based upon the historical trend of kindergarten matriculating to first grade. So, and then for each of the others, then we just use that survival ratio from grade to grade to grade. But kindergarten and first grade are our toughest ones to do because a lot of students don't go to first grade but don't attend kindergarten. Okay, then we throw all this together once we come up with the 10-year forecast, and we say, well, how many high schools are we going to need? How many schools are we going to do? We do this for elementary, middle, and high school. High school and elementary are the toughest, and the challenge we've got is that it's really, really tough to know what high school capacity is, and we've struggled with this question for quite a long time. So what we've said is, well, let's do different models. And we said, well, maybe the capacity is 1,800, maybe the capacity is 2,000, maybe the capacity is 2,200, and we'll let the board decide how many students and the community decide they want to put into the school. So what happened if we looked at all of these, guess what? We all found that we still need to bring a high school on in 1819, only if the board says they can go about 2,200 and just get pushed back 1 year to 1920. Okay, so three different, the Rome forecast, three different capacity models for high school.
If the funding is passed, will the new high school open in 2018 as per that chart?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if it passes,
Right.
then
So it'll be the fall.
Jeff we've hired an architect, they're busy working, everybody's planning like mad, we're looking construction manager, so things are cranking right along.
Yeah, we do not have the ability to wait till after the levy to start the planning and some of those things to meet that timeline. So we have hired an architect and we're working with a construction manager as well as an owner's rep. And those contracts are all contingent on if the levy fails, then they're contingent on the levy passing.
Are you going to try to cookie cutter another school, like another high school?
We are planning to do the same footprint as Liberty and Orange with modifications within that footprint.
Modifications because of the land?
No, modifications because of, when you think about Orange was a strict replication of Liberty High School, and that building was planned in 2000, 2001. So the way education's delivered has really changed over the last 15, 16 years and 18 years before it opens. So we're looking at opening up some spaces within for collaboration and some of that. And the way the buildings were designed originally, down the academic wings, it has the ability. It's really pillars that hold it up, even though the walls go down. So we have the ability to move walls within. It doesn't really impact the structure. It doesn't impact us cost-wise. So we're not making major changes. It's been a good building for us. The corridor that we keep hearing about, and there's a picture of with the levee, we found a way to widen that corridor by 12 feet, as well as where the stairwells empty into it, change how they kind of empty out and spread it out and back up the media center. Again, adjustments within the footprints. We don't have to expand the walls, add cost, but opens up that space.
Yeah, I do see it really crowded in that entryway, because when we went there just for a theater
If anybody wants
performance.
to have a lifetime experience, go and stand at those three things, and the stairs come down, you stand there during class changes.
Or try to leave the copy room and get to your
Yeah,
classroom.
it's kind of
Yeah.
awesome. It's just one of the bucket list things you can check off.
Go to third period every day, stand there. Oh, wait, that's what I do.
I was gonna say, when you do stand there, it comes to a complete stop. It doesn't move. It's crazy.
Next one.
But we do save money on our building costs by replicating our buildings.
And we've done it well, the buildings. When you look at, so we joke, if we did have to go ever to a high school and look at that building, or somebody that wants to use our plan, what do you do different? So we've done it twice, and we're just doing tweaks and kind of changing some collaboration-based education, not really things that were not working. So the discussions of doing another building was we once you get it open, you find all those things like that corridor and stuff like that that you didn't see until you put 2,000 kids in it or 1,800 kids in it. So by tweaking that, we really can eliminate some of those things that maybe don't work, because we know and we've done it so for the third time. And the other part is we build it, so we know what our costs are, our construction costs, and so we can be pretty firm on what it is as we go through and interview construction managers and those other groups. We can, we build our buildings less per square foot than anybody else in the state, and less than what the state programs do. And so sometimes your construction manager says, oh, you can't do that. And we've told them in our pre-interview meetings and pre-submission meetings, that's our cost per square foot. It's been escalated from 2008 to today, but that's our cost. If you can't meet it, don't bid on it, because we're not changing it. So we've been very firm on that, and told them if you don't think you can do it, you shouldn't submit. We'll change construction managers, but we're not changing our budget. So we know we can do it.
And as far as the busing and the roads and that kind of thing, I know at Berkshire there's a real problem where the buses going back to the bus garage with the parents trying to turn and pick up their kids after school. Are you going to kind of eliminate those issues too, with the way the buses go in and out of the building, as to where the parents?
The layout of it, and it's all as we get after the levy, and by that time we'll really have it laid out, because our site plan is still based on working with the township, working with the county. The main thing is how we take the storm water and drain it off the site.
Yeah.
So that's going to dictate a lot of things that we have to do. But right now, and I think this will remain the same, the building essentially lays out like Orange does, faces the same direction, faces south. But at Orange, you have Orange Middle School at the top, so cars come down from Orange Middle School down to the back of the building, circle around and come out. That building, same thing, they'll have a road to that side of the building, to the west side of the building, allows the community to come out, where parent and student traffic will come in the other side.
Okay.
So your bus traffic and your parent traffic are separate?
Right.
Nice.
Good. This is the assessing elementary school needs. And we measure seats, not children. And that's kind of important to remember, because pre-K, we're only getting 15 students per classroom, where they're designed for 25. So we set a capacity of 675. That's seats. But these 15 students are using up 25 seats. So we're not getting utilization of our buildings as we want. And this is a real concern, if our pre-K enrollment keeps going up, and we're not forecast to go up, but we really don't know, is that it could put a squeeze on our elementary capacity. Right now, if you look just at pre-K, we're using 80% of an elementary school just for pre-K. And that's taking that away from, students, where we're getting 23, 22 students per classroom. So that's why we measure seats, not heads. Then, and this is the hardest part. If you didn't think that was hard, this is where it gets really harder. We've got, because we need to forecast the enrollment by individual school. And remember I said we have 3 different models. Well, all those are kind of applied at a macro level. But to know how many students at each individual school, you've got to get down to the individual subdivision level. And so we've got these huge spreadsheets with every subdivision, every apartment complex, where they are assigned, how many students are coming in each grade level, and we use that, again, applying the smoothing model data as well as some build-out data, try to project what subdivisions these students will be coming from, so we know what the approximate by school enrollment is going to be. And this is a bit of science and a bit of art. And that's what we end up with. So this is the elementary sheet that we present to the board, and this is what the high school looks like. And to your point on Liberty, it looks like it fits there, and then it starts dropping down 20, 21, 21, 22.
But we're still over capacity.
Yeah, still over capacity for a while. All right, that's all I've got.
Any questions? He's been doing this for years.
Are you a statistician by chance?
Um,
What do you do for a living?
Yeah, Ralph,
That's pretty
tell the
impressive.
committee.
Well, I'm
You are.
actually retired
How long
now.
you've been doing
What
this?
But-
did you do?
I was a software architect. Software. But I'm on the board of Delaware County Historical Society, and we're trying to open a barn, and you've seen that in there. We have a big open house on the 20th and 21st, so come on out.
Ralph's a volunteer.
Yes, amazing
So-
job.
Professional volunteer.
Yes, and how long have you been doing this, Rob?
Oh, golly, gosh.
Since Wyandotte opened? Did you do Wyandotte?
No, we did it just after Wyandotte, that the committee was formed.
Yeah.
Great.
It scares me, because as I sat there and I watched Ralph doing this, it occurred to me that there isn't anybody else. Rich Siles is the other one that works with Ralph closely in the numbers, and Rich also is probably nearing the end of his desire to spend a lot of time on facilities committee, so it scares me that Ralph leaves, I'm going to be stuck doing that part of it.
And he likes doing it.
He does.
It's fun. You gotta be geeky, but it's.
Well, thank you.
Maybe somebody
Thanks for
volunteers
what you
to do
do.
that stuff.
Yes.
That's what's amazing. So, mentioned earlier about how we follow and density and things. So some of the information I'm giving you is really, 3 years ago when the economy was starting to come out, but wasn't yet in houses. We really had a lot of multifamily housing in the district, so condos, apartments, those things. And a lot of people were panicking because of what was coming in and the concern and all the extra students. And so they would ask us to come to township meetings and village meetings in Powell and the far north, Columbus, 23, and Lozelle, and Liberty Township, and talk. And so I would go, and I would get a lot of pressure, because when I went up there, the community members who were there and didn't want multifamily housing, we'll talk about the proposal from 3 years ago at Seldom Seen Selma Parkway, and then the one especially at the far north,
Yeah, it's that Worthington.
yeah, they meet at the
Yeah,
church in
the
Worthington,
church
far north. Anyhow, they're a volunteer group that does zoning and makes recommendations to the city for the far north side. And there was one gentleman there that got really mad at me because he wanted me to stand up and say, the schools do not want apartments, they're not good for the district, they cost us money. And when I was done presenting and I showed you some of the facts we showed them, he was mad at me. He argued with me and basically said I was lying to him because I wouldn't get up there and say that we didn't want these kids and that was there. And as you guys know, any kids that come in the district, we're going to educate. And that's what we do. We're happy to have any kids and bring them in. But when we really start looking at the apartments, it's important to remember what we're really getting. And the majority of the apartments, like the ones at Seldom Seen Selma Parkway, and I think they've got another proposal over there. And a lot of those apartments going in are really for, they plan them for young singles or young couples, young professionals, and we don't see a lot of students out of those apartments. Now, even some of the apartments down off of Polaris, our yields aren't terribly high. We've got one that's really high here that you take this one out of the mix, and you go down the list, and our average is somewhere around 0.15 yield, so 0.15 students per apartment. That's really not a large number when you look at the apartments that are coming in. Even, somebody mentioned earlier, Polaris, here's Lake Club. So that's 0.16. So even those apartments where you would think that have a little lower rent cost on them, that the families, we still don't have a high yield. So the average of these is 0.15, and this one skews a little bit, it's a little bit higher. But so when you keep that in mind, that we're getting these apartments, we're not seeing a lot of kids coming from the apartments, especially the young professional, the ones designed for that, where they have the bar right on site, and a lot of things. I think even the one on Seldom Seen Selma Park, we even had some commercial, maybe office space underneath, or some kind of commercial space underneath. So to give you an idea what that is, we did this calculation. I shared this at the meeting. Can everybody see this good well enough?
Yeah,
Tried to
it's
get,
seldom seen.
yeah, I tried to get a lot of information. This is analysis we did when Seldom Seen was being planned. And what we did, we went to the county and we got the approximate value per unit from them, get an idea, and then we got the assessed value of those units. You can see what was proposed there at the time was 144 apartment units, and then 336 a little bit bigger units. I think they were 2-bedroom, or there was some mix that made it so total. But the end result was our net revenue to the district in taxes from that development would have been $970,000. So when you take the total number of units times the yield, and we did a 0.25 yield, 0.15 yield, to give an idea of what, and over here we did a 0.05 and 0.25 yield, just to give different ideas of what, depending on the numbers of students. So here we would have 12 students coming out, over here 24 students, this one would be 72 students, and then the max is if we hit 0.25. Remember, our average is 0.15, but if we hit 0.25 yield from that apartment, which was unlikely and given the plan that they had for it, we aren't seeing that kind of yield coming from those apartments. So what we found when we looked at it was for the 0.025 yield, the revenue exceeded our costs as a district. So our cost for educating the student, number of students times the cost in 2013 for educating the students. What we found was the revenue exceeded our costs. Our taxes coming from that development actually exceeded the cost to educate the students coming from it. So as you can see, when I get up and talk to people in front of people that don't want it, and they want us to say it's not good or the district's against it, it's hard to make that argument. So if you come down all the way through the 0.15 cost model, we still had excess revenue for the 0.15 yield, which is our average yield. And those average yields haven't changed in the last 3 years. We haven't seen significant change in those. The only place where at some point where cost exceeded revenue was if we saw the 0.25 yield on those apartments. And we weren't likely to see that. Possible, but not likely, at least in the near term from that. So our tax revenue actually for that apartment would have been more, likely to be more than the expenses from it. And that's important because again, when people come in and they want the district, we will never come out and say we're against apartments or any of that other development because we're here for the residents and students coming in. But again, this is a viewpoint when we talk about how we look at growth, and Ralph talked a lot about how we project the growth and what we look at in our models. The other part is when the townships ask us our opinion, or hey, how does this impact you? This is the stuff that we put together and we speak with them. So I delivered this one at the Liberty Township and maybe the Palomino. It is Liberty Township, this one was. And we did another one that we'll talk about here for Gulf Village North, which is north of Hyatt's Middle School. And that was a tough one because the property that was donated by Don Kenny, and he still owned the property at Gulf, what they termed at the time Gulf Village North. So the developer that gave us the land for our middle school and elementary school now is developing the rest of his land, and we were asked to come and speak about how that impacted the district with the expectation that it was going to be a negative impact. In his case, what originally was planned, he had a master plan, and when the economy slowed down, he didn't do the Gulf Village North, so that sat for a while. So once things started picking back up, he looked at going that property, what he originally had planned for was 139 basically condo units or small, townhome type, standalone houses. And with that, at that current zoning, our tax revenue would have been $753,000 times what we see from condos, 0.12, a little bit less on condos. 0.12 students, we actually would have had the tax benefits to the district of $595,000. That was, yeah.
What are some of the characteristics of an apartment complex that has a low yield rate? Like, what would you be looking for if you were on a zoning commission?
Well, again, the ones that are for young professionals.
Like the lifestyle communities, they have the bars in them.
Fitness centers.
Yeah,
Fitness centers.
yeah.
And they're
fitness centers.
marketed towards young professionals.
No more than 2 bedrooms,
Yeah.
not
And then-
townhouses.
Yeah. And then the proposed rents.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference in,
Higher price point?
yeah, higher price point for them. That makes a difference as well. So, yeah, so that's what we saw there. So what we talked about was when our density changes, that's when we have to worry because we have all of our models. So in this case, interesting, is they wanted to change what they were doing. So again, the economy hadn't completely come back. Housing was just getting started back up again. So they wanted to change the 100 and,
They want to change to the.
yeah, the 130 to.
139 to.
Yeah, 139 to 360 apartments. And you see what that does to us. Then our tax revenue drops, our yield comes up because it's apartments. And in this case, cost exceeded revenue by $96,000. So in this case, this was one that would have impacted us negatively if we got the yield from the apartments that we would have expected with those. What happened is it was not approved and they put in 129 houses. So we actually were we're back, not the same, but pretty close to what we had here. Instead of 139, we had 129. So it worked out, wasn't approved, and again, this is information we shared. So hopefully maybe we were able in our own way to impact that by communicating and collaborating with the township and the villages on these things.
So if any time that, Adam has a project come to them, I don't think you have any apartments. Do you have any apartments?
Not
You don't
a
have any
single one.
apartments.
Not yet.
Yeah. They could ask us for these types of studies, and this is exactly what we'll give them, and it's backed up by Ralph's data. We always pride ourselves in Olentangy, whether it's building a new building or changing curriculum, we make data-driven decisions here. And so this is the type of data that we use.
It's very interesting because there's definitely a conception on at least our zoning commission and probably other rural townships zoning commissions that apartments are bad for the school district. And this is obviously evidence to the contrary.
And honestly, there were a lot of people arguing against the apartments, and it wasn't what the apartments are today. They were arguing against where they'll be 30 years from now. And that was really where they were trying to hang their hat in that argument.
Mhm.
So, and I wasn't there to speak to that. But. Oops.
Because I know in the Olentangy attendance area, Olentangy High School attendance area, there aren't any apartments. So that's just so odd. Liberty and Orange has them, but Olentangy does not. So Julie's goes to Orange.
Well, they do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just,
So-
the border's just north of
Mhm.
there. So.
So if you're trying to get into the Olentangy attendance area and you're like building your house and you have to rent an apartment, there isn't anything. You have to rent a house. So,
Where this does impact us though is, as I said, each new housing development, whether single multifamily, brings additional students. And while there's a small development that may not impact us, again, that we saw how the 139 homes impacted us. Why that doesn't change things, it's the 139 here and 139 there and all of those that do bring additional students. So while we get more tax revenue from that, what does happen is we start to fill up the buildings, and you've seen it over the years, is we have to add it. Eventually we have to add a building. So if they start coming faster, obviously we add buildings sooner, and that's where we get impacted. They all start coming together at one time. As they come on slower, like they have the last few years, obviously we haven't had to build as quickly, and it's allowed some of the students kind of move through and some of the houses to return. I think from our standpoint, the economy slowing down is probably a good thing for us to allow us to maybe cut back on ability. But continued enrollment growth, again, will keep driving us to continue going back to the community for tax dollars, which this is all information you guys know and why you're here.
and to Jeff's point, in 2011, we approved to sell bonds. There were no additional millage bonds to build the 16th elementary school. And when our projections slowed down, we decided not to build that elementary school. And so those bonds were approved. We never sold them, so you're not paying taxes on them. They were no additional millage, so your tax bill would not have gone up. You would have just paid them off. So we still have that. We still have approval for those bonds to sell if we wanted to do an elementary school. Technically, we could have used those bonds toward the new high school, but it was the feeling of the school board, no, you voters approved that for an elementary school. We're not going to, we could have taken taken liberties with them and used them toward the high school because they were approved, but we told you they're for elementary. So we did not sell them, we haven't touched them, you're not paying on them.
What was the total amount?
16?
It was probably 16 million.
Yeah, it was 16.
But it was a no additional bond package, so your current tax rate on the bonds would not have gone up. It's like how we're financing the high school. So if we saw a large spike in something, we could build build an elementary because we have the money there, but we don't see the need. We still have space in Arrowhead, for example. Even after redistricting, we still have space in Wyandotte, which we never had space in Wyandotte. And so,
Surprising.
so we still have space throughout the district, and what you want to balance is efficiency. You don't want to have one school that's, 150 students under, and then another school that's 75 students over, because then you're not operating efficiently. So that's why we do redistricting, academics and efficiency. So that's always the balancing act. Now, Ralph, one question I've gotten is, well, if we have to build a new high school, why aren't we building a middle school?
The forecast doesn't show that we're needing middle schools.
See, you're hearing
We
it
have-
from
we
the
have
guy.
five- We have 5 middle schools, and there's a enrollment imbalance. In other words, and it escapes me which ones are high, but some are high, some are low,
Yeah,
just like Yale.
Shanahan.
Shanahan, right, is very high. But that's why there's a redistricting committee to try to smooth those out. But the 10-year plan doesn't show it. Now, again, that's the current 10-year plan, so building goes wild, people start having babies, moving into the district, and it can change, but that's why we do it every year.
I don't know of any other school district in the state that does it every year. Big Walnut will do one every 5 years to see where they are, and they're gonna do one again. Dublin will do one as necessary. They used to be on the same schedule that we were on, now we've surpassed them. But, so we're we're the only school district in the state that does an enrollment projection every single year.
But we are the fastest growing in the state.
Exactly.
So that's responsible.
Yes, right,
And thank you
yes.
for your projections.
Future projections, did you know about the whole Evans Farm?
I did not.
Because those would not be in line with our land use.
Yeah. How does that-
And they wouldn't have showed up on the subdivision listing when we did the November. So,
Things like that pop
The caution
up.
though, it's the current lots, the current zoning that's there for those lots. So when he looks at that vacant land, he looks at the current zoning, so that they could get approximately this many houses there.
Right.
So it's not that we weren't planning for houses in that location, it's when they come and how fast they
Right.
come.
Right,
And then
right.
again,
The-
the
the-
density is
right,
changing.
the build-out definitely did include it because it identifies undeveloped land and it used the zoning for undeveloped land. So what would change would be the density as a result of that.
And that's what distinguishes for us, not panicking when somebody comes and says, hey, we're gonna put houses there. You're changing the density and you change by, and I'm not sure what that changes for that development, but if it changes, 5 houses or one was 139 and end up putting it at the end of 129, that change back and forth is not huge for us. We plan for that when you're seeing the apartments or the houses, 0.75, you're not seeing a student from every one or 2 or 3 students from every house. When that changes, it's not a significant number, it doesn't panic us because our long-range planning, we've accounted for those. So some of that may change and tweak over the years, but somebody coming in and saying, oh, we're going to develop that property, that's not, and it takes a period of time. I think that
I was just gonna ask you, it's 10 to 15 year build out for the Evans property in Orange Township.
Yeah.
Now, Berlin will be longer than that because you haven't started the process
That's right.
yet. But I don't want people to think, oh, there's 950 residents planned, some condos, some homes. Oh my gosh, we're gonna get impacted next year. They've already said in Orange Township, they're gonna start building the commercial properties first. And the commercial properties will be along Lewis Center Road, and head north along the railroad track. So they're gonna put the commercial properties in there, and then it'll go all the way up to, what's the next road, Hollenbeck. So the commercial properties will lay around the railroad tracks because they know that homes don't wanna be by the railroad tracks, smart planning. But we're not gonna have 950 new residents tomorrow. So I know in my subdivision, the Villages of Oak Creek, it took 7 years to build out. It's one of the larger subdivisions on the east side, but it took 7 years to build out. So then, we opened up Oak Creek right in the middle of that subdivision. So we do have time to plan, but that's why we do these enrollment projections so that we know, oh my gosh, in 2021, we might need another elementary school.
I remember that one chart that showed that district's age and the peak of the year is about 10 to 15 years after, when the subdivisions pulled down.
Well,
So we have time.
I think Liberty's another good example. If you look at, we talked about that peaking in 2 years and starting to come down, they'll still be building houses and developing to the north of Liberty. So we will still continue to have new students in Liberty, just because the enrollment's leveling out, doesn't mean we're not getting new students. It's that the ones to the south have aged and are bringing students to us at a slower rate, so.
Right, yeah, those cool attendance boundaries that are landlocked or completely built out, is really interesting to watch because you start to see the enrollment peak and then start to see it gradually coming down. So, Olentangy's, this might be a bad thing to say, is going to be in a perpetual redistricting for as long as you can proceed, just because of what happens as new subdivisions come on and the older ones kind of age out.
No, I'm glad that you said that, because in redistricting, we kept getting, and even though I wasn't on the committee, and you can speak to this, we kept saying, well, can't you guarantee that I won't move anymore? You know, they were asking, can't you lock me in? You know, I was for sure, when we did the redistricting for Olentangy Meadows, the further south elementary, that we could lock those kids in. There's not gonna be any more. What did we have to do? Pull kids out of that school. So.
Yeah, I mean, and that, so Julie?
Katie.
Katie? She
Yeah.
was also on the
Yeah.
redistricting as well, and, you know, it's just such a dense, it's really where the population lives at, and you're going to have to shift people to get the building utilizations that we're looking for. I mean, you could try to put everybody into one building, you know, and put 825 kids into Olentangy Meadows, that type of thing. That's what the number would be if everybody who lived right there went to that elementary school. It's a building with capacity of, what, 675 or something like that, so they'd be over capacity. So you definitely have to move them based on utilization.
Well, I don't mean to sound callous, but we could have worse problems than that. I mean, in response to that, you might say, well, do they have good teachers? Do they have a safe environment to attend school?
Sure.
Do they have textbooks? You know, you have to keep everything in perspective.
Right.
And you know, when I used to interdistrict transfers into my office when I first came here, thank goodness some others wanted that. It's not a fun process, but it was interesting, with, especially the elementaries were opening at the time. I would get calls, and it was never, that's a terrible elementary school I don't want my kids to go to. It was, my kids love this teacher, or love this principal, or really enjoy this building. I don't want to move. Not because they didn't like the building we wanted to, it's just they were so attached to the one that they were at, because it was so good. And that was a nice problem to have, because it wasn't, well, they didn't have good reasons for not going. I say good reasons that, oh, it's terrible over there, or this is going, you know, it was, we just love this building so much, we can't bear to leave it. So, and what we found out, a lot of times you run into somebody, you talk to them 2 years later, like, oh, it was fine. So, yeah.
Anybody have any more questions for
our panel
anybody?
of experts here, what we want you to do, because this is the advocacy committee, is advocate now what you've learned tonight, because they've answered a lot of your questions. You know, do we need a middle school? No, our projections aren't saying that we need a middle school. How do apartments impact us? Well, not by a lot, you know, according to our historical data. So if you could go out and share that information, we would really appreciate
A
it.
lot of those questions are on various Facebook pages. I know the apartment one comes up a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I
A lot.
want to speak about one that I've seen a lot
Yeah.
too, and it's, people think if they vote yes for this, that they're going to get redistricted. And the message is, you're going to get redistricted regardless, you know.
For a long
Excellent,
time.
excellent point.
There's not much,
There's not much you can do about it, and how do you go back to the taxpayers and say, well, we need another $16 million elementary school because this one has 125 extra, but that one over there is short 250. You can't ask that of the voters to pay when we're not maximizing our efficiency.
Even when we looked at the second option, which is to add capacity to each school, even if you do that, you probably are still going to end up redistricting. There was no solution
Yeah.
that did result eventually in redistricting.
It's just the pain of being in a large
It's the pain
district.
of living in Olentangy School District.
And we have a graduate here that can say that redistricted didn't
Were you
affect you.
redistricted?
Not once.
Because of where you
Not once.
live,
Oh, my
because you lived
goodness.
up north
I live
here.
in Berlin Township, and I went the Arrowheads, the first year it
Okay.
opened, and then the Shanahan.
You were lucky,
And,
yeah.
but everybody else I knew
Yeah.
was redistricted.
Any other questions for us? If not, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much for coming. Please share the information.